would you like to believe in? A God who answers every prayer? Would you like a God who destroys all your enemies? Would you like a God who solves all your problems, takes away all your sufferings? Right through the history of the world, people have longed to have messiahs who would take away all their problems and give them a comfortable life. Take for example, when the Gospel according to Mark was being written to the Christians in Rome, they were undergoing persecution. They were being killed. The question predominant in their mind was, why isn't God saving them? Has God abandoned us? And it is to these feelings that Mark is responding in his Gospel by presenting Jesus as a suffering Messiah. Mark says Jesus could work wonders, and yet he chooses to be a suffering Messiah. In the first part of Mark's Gospel, Jesus is not recognized as a Messiah until he asks Peter, "Who do you say I am?" And then Peter recognizes Jesus and says, "You are the Messiah, you are the Son of God." But Mark highlights that even though Peter has recognized Jesus as the Messiah, he hasn't fully understood what type of Messiah Jesus is. Mark, in the second half of the Gospel, shows how Jesus is teaching his disciples that yes, I am the Messiah, but I am a suffering Messiah. The event of the Transfiguration is one of those incidents in which Jesus is teaching his disciples that he is the suffering Messiah. So for example, when at the Transfiguration we have Peter suggesting that let's build 3 tents, one for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for Jesus. Peter is working with the understanding that Jesus is one of the great prophets. The dazzling white clothes of Jesus, the voice that comes from heaven, all these attest to the divine, to the transcendental identity of Jesus. And in that incident, Jesus communicates to his disciples that even though he has a transcendental identity, he is the Son of God, and yet he is a suffering Messiah. This is a great lesson for all of us. When we are faced with sufferings, are we afraid of sufferings? Obviously, no one wants sufferings. But it is one thing to say we don't want suffering, and it's another thing to say that I am afraid of sufferings. Because if I am afraid of sufferings, then I will compromise on my values a bit too easily, because I do not want to take a stance. Standing up for one's values can be a crucifying experience, especially if you have to stand up to some powerful people. And therefore, if we are afraid of sufferings, then we will prefer to remain in our comfort zones. Our worship will be disconnected from issues of real life, issues of justice, equality, harmony among various sections of society. In the Transfiguration event, Jesus gave his disciples a glimpse into eternity. They were able to see his transcendental identity and therefore his transcendental destiny. It is in this glimpse of eternity that the disciples receive their resolve, their strength to handle sufferings of this earthly life. Hence, for all of us, when we are faced with various challenges, we need to look at things from an eternal perspective and let go of our fears. Jesus becomes our role model, our inspiration to stand up for our values and be willing to pay the price. Jesus is not a God who will make all our sufferings disappear. In fact, He is the suffering Messiah who will show us how to handle sufferings, and by showing us how to handle sufferings, will take away our fear of suffering and death. And once we have overcome the fear of suffering and death, an amazing source of divine energy is let loose inside of us that transforms us and enables us to transform the situation. That is the message of the Transfiguration event. That is the message for you and me, to be courageous, to look at sufferings from an eternal perspective, and to respond to it with no fear of suffering and death.